What's up everyone? In the last episode of San Francisco, we finally started to build out across the bay towards Oakland. And in this episode, I want to connect up the two sides of the bay with some public transport. And I'm finally going to get to plumb into the Salesforce transit hub that I built a number of episodes back. And this line that we're going to run underneath the bay here isn't too far off the real life line as well. It's going to run straight out of that Salesforce hub underground, and then it's going to run right across the bay into pretty much Oakland, and then slowly transition into an above ground station. I'm quite excited for this episode because we get to build out a decent sized neighborhood nice and early and introduce some people to the area. We are going to have thousands of jobs on offer down at the port area we make because it is massive, and we'll get to that a bit later. So one of the first things I'm going to do is run the highway through here, and it runs around in this sort of beautiful semicircle shape, and then we are going to build our very first neighborhood in Oakland. Yay! Woohoo! I really can't wait to see people over here moving into all the houses and working down at the port, the trains coming in, car parks filling up. The neighborhood that we're starting with here as well is really beautiful in its own right. The architecture is lovely, there's heaps of greenery around, and you have a 70-foot highway just at your back door. All jokes aside, I'm really excited to get stuck into building out Oakland properly. I know I didn't do too much in the last episode, so let's really make up for it in this episode. So the highway here sweeps around the outside of this neighborhood that we've all got the roads ready to go for. There's also some on-off ramps here, so that's what I'm going to install here. And just when I thought this interchange here was looking all nice and smooth and finished, there it was, the dreaded wobbly ramp. Close enough that you can't see it from distance, but bad enough to throw cars directly off the road. This can also be a product of the node controller. So we'll quickly fix that up, and then we're going to move on to getting these train lines in here, and these get very technical. Some of the most technical train lines I think I've put in the whole city so far. Eventually we're going to have very intricate ones running in and through the port area, and there's even going to be some cool abandoned ones, which were just, oh my god, they were so fun to make. I love making anything abandoned. I think it's just so cool. Anyway, the rail line that I'm using here is the North American rail from Grey Flame, if anyone's after it. And by the way guys, I do have a collection that's linked in the description of the video if you're after anything from the series. And there's also a link for the map in the description of the video as well guys, if you're interested in building along. I'm going to take a little bit of time here to run this rail line right into our port area in a couple of spots here, then we're going to move on to the next bit. Alright, so I'm going to shuffle some of these buildings we placed down in the last episode out of the way so I can get the very first train line coming through here. It's just the one single line, and as it gets closer to the shed that I guess that it's servicing or whatever, it splits into 3 and in some places 4 different lines. So using that same North American rail line from Grey Flame, I'm going to get this just above the concrete and then carry on with the train line outside of this immediate port area. I try not to put too much pressure on myself in regards to these railways because I'm not very good at them, and I know I'm probably going to come back and change these a fair bit in future, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. In fact, most things get better the second time we do them. But the gist of it here is there is a big rail yard here with lots of different lines. The next step that we're going to take is finishing this bad boy before we move on. Next, we are finally going to put the line in from the Salesforce hub across the bay. I really had to dig out the old node to connect up the metro here. It had been so long since I'd been over here. It's been about 50 odd in-game years that they've just had these unusable metro stations underneath the Salesforce hub. these ghostly stations they would have been, like abandoned ghost towns. And I guess we're finally scrubbing off all the graffiti and hooking them up and putting them to work. And man, it feels good to finally hook these up. Or at least this one. We have 2 metro lines in the Salesforce hub, and I'm only going to run one across the bay. The other one, I'm pretty sure, is going to link in like a local loop around San Francisco. So anyway, the reason I wanted to get the neighborhood roads put down over here across the bay is because this line comes in on the same angle as the roading grid. And even though you guys know we're not going like for like here or anywhere near the real scale, I thought it was pretty important to make sure that Metro line came in at the same angle as those roads. So once that's hooked up and over to an elevated stop, I'll take a little bit of time to shuffle these lines over. Not very delicately, admittedly, but eventually I'll get this in the right place with nice smooth angles to the ups and downs. Some of it's above ground, some of it's below. And once it's at that point, I can come back and detail it all up later on. Now next we've got a really tricky piece of infrastructure. Looking on Google Earth, I seen that there was a collector road that ran from this neighbourhood and down to the port area that went under our highway and underneath our train line, but ran next to an above ground metro. Of course, that metro line is our one we've just brought in from across the bay, but it's very important to get all of this right before we start doing anything of more importance. Then we want to hook a transport line up from the Salesforce hub over here and then back. Then we're going to put some water in, and hopefully we can get some citizens in here very soon. We are finally ready to introduce some citizens into our first little Oakland neighborhood here. The highways are set up, I've got that metro line running over to the main city if they work over there, and eventually we'll have more connections as well, but it feels good to get those in before we put these houses in, because we're going to have a lot of people live over here. It's also going to supply us with a lot of uneducated citizens that are going to be employed down at the port area, which is perfect. In terms of the architecture of the homes I'm putting up, or the general architecture, they are very much still that Victorian style that we see back pretty much right throughout San Francisco, except these ones here I noticed have a lot more greenery around them and have a bit of a backyard. Let's push on with this port area, get the rest of these train lines in, and start putting some real factories in here so we can get some work going on. I mentioned in the last episode that we're going to introduce a few industries in here. Well, that plan has changed slightly. We do introduce some industry, but not as much as I first sort of thought I would. We do something else instead, but we'll get to that soon. If there's one thing this area needs before all others, it's going to be some sort of freight or cargo terminal. We're going to have a lot of product come in and go out of here. I don't particularly like the look of the vanilla one, so I found this one here on Steam that looks really realistic, and we're going to hook this up and make sure this is all running nice and smooth before we detail around it. Now, if you guys have played City Skylines a bit, and I'm sure you have, you'll know that these freight terminals, they produce a lot of traffic, and not the good type either. They're all nasty trucks, the guys don't really know how to drive, they all use one lane. So not only am I going to try and plumb this up with the train, obviously, I'm also going to try and have separate highway connections running directly from here. No doubt that's at the cost of the taxpayer, probably millions and millions, but I'm going to make sure that this traffic is not a problem that flows in and out of this freight terminal. We're going to have 2 lanes running directly from the terminal either way into the highway, and we're also going to have a single lane that's going to plumb back around and just into the local roads here back in this industry area. And that of course is in case any of the goods delivered by train need to be delivered locally here to this port area. You guys may notice as well that I'm using one of Coos's cool pedestrian walkways, and I'm running that underneath the highway here, and that goes right over our train yard. There's a lot of people using that. I'm picking they're going to work or whatever, which is great. That's exactly what we want. Next, I'm just going to mess around with that road and get it as narrow and nice looking as I can, following all the grid patterns and using node controller to make it a bit nicer. You'll also notice too that there's another train line coming in very close to this and crossing across the road at a 45-degree angle. This is a line that we're going to use a bit later on. It's really just going to be a dummy line, but we're going to make it look like it's got access into another factory. So you can see here I'm really trying to integrate this area with rail lines everywhere. That's most of the rail lines in now that I want to install. Now I can go back and start putting some warehouses and factories in, so it looks like they've got some good access to these rail lines. I'm hoping this really just sort of integrates all the area and makes it all sort of look usable. Of course, it's also exactly what we see in real life, and some of these lines to me also look abandoned, like I mentioned earlier. So there's going to be predominantly two types of building I put in this area. Some of them, like this one here you're watching me do, are going to be very integrated, so they look like they roll with the train track. They've either got platforms or they're shaped around the track, or they're just really nicely integrated one way or another, and that's normally done with procedural objects. And the next type are going to be functioning buildings that are going to rely on good access, a good local highway network, and lots of pies for the truck drivers. So let's carry on really integrating it here, and you can see this building I found on the workshop has got this cool bit here where we can run some lines through it. So we're going to put a couple of these down so it looks like those train lines are running right through it. Maybe some of these goods unload directly inside, maybe some of the goods need to be sheltered while they're unloaded for whatever reason. In any case, it looks damn cool running through the building, I reckon. So that's the real important stuff. Let's really start bringing this area together now. We want some car parks around here, heaps and heaps of them actually. And I'm also going to extend that dock edge over, that Ronix 69 dock edge, and some surface networks to clean up this edge of the terrain here where it meets the water. We're also going to add some train lines along the waterfront that I kind of want to make it look like they're servicing the crane, and the rest of the area is just going to be filled with various props. So speaking of props, let's go. Let's finish this area right off. We want cranes in here, lots of containers, heaps of random cars and pallets around the place that look like they're ready to be loaded. I also want to have some really grubby looking decals around. Now's where we really want to make this thing look realistic and look like a real life port or harbour area. Yes, that's right, you were seeing me zone some industry area, but don't worry, we are going to cover this with some factories very strategically. Oftentimes I really struggle with plopping down industry buildings one at a time to satisfy the demand. Maybe I'm putting down the wrong type of building or whatever, I'm not too sure. But in any case, being able to zone out industry areas really trumps that, because the game's only going to build what is in demand. So if I can build a whole bunch of smallish little factories here and cover them with bigger ones, whether they're PO or real ones, you know, I could make that work. So anyway, let's keep rolling here. I want to do a big piece of either land that's being sort of developed at the moment, or maybe there was development on it and it's been busted down. We're also going to make a small piece here where the tracks haven't been used for many years. So the first lot I want to make here, I want to make it look like there's cranes and construction equipment being stored here now. Maybe it's just temporarily until they build whatever they're building here. And with the rest of it, I'm just going to make a big, dirty, dusty construction site. Maybe you can still see the shells of some buildings around and stuff, car parks being temporarily used for storage, but I really love these areas because they help with the realism massively. Well guys, we have made some serious progress in this episode on this side of the bay. I hope everyone from Oakland that's watching has been enjoying the last couple of episodes. I appreciate a thumbs up if you guys have enjoyed the video. If you really enjoyed my content, you can subscribe for more. As always guys, please take care of yourselves, take care of each other. You're appreciated. I love you guys tuning in and watching my stuff. And I'll see you on the next episode of City Skylines Oakland. City Skylines San Francisco. See you later guys.